Hey, everybody, it's Tommy Canale, and welcome to Before the Lights podcast, the show to find out how those in sports, music, and entertainment made their mark. Let's get this show started. Go get your coffee or grab a drink and tell your family, friends, neighbors, and strangers the show is about to begin. Joining me today is the author of the book, The Last Casino. He worked in the casino industry for almost 50 years. He was a casino shift manager, a vice president of casino marketing, a craps manager, a baccarat manager, a senior executive host, and senior executive credit executive, a compliance officer. He's born in Corona, New York, and a friend to many celebrities. Please welcome to the show, Ralph Delligatti. Ralph, how are you, my friend?
Oh, I'm fine, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for being on the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I've been anxious to hear from you so we could do this.
Before we start, I want to say thank you to Brett Giuliano from Dust Bunny Mafia. He's our newest Patreon member. If you'd like to be part of the Extra 5 and the BTL crew, go to patreon.com/Before the Lights to get extra content and join us on Zoom calls. So Brett, thank you so much for being part of the Patreon group. Ralph has written the book, The Last Casino, actual events from the late 1970s at the Last Run Mob Casino. The book was written in 1998 and published in 2003. You can go to thelastcasino.net, which I will have on our show notes. I highly suggest you read the book to get the entire story, because Ralph and I are not going to give you everything here on the show, but we're going to go over a lot of things. It's kind of a full circle story. But to start off, Ralph, talk to my listeners and tell us what it was like growing up in New York.
Growing up during the Second World War, and so that was quite an experience for a young kid. I remember when I walked the streets of my neighborhood, every other person was in uniform, and every window had a flag in it, one or two or three stars, which signified that one, two, or three people from that particular family was in the military somewhere fighting in the war. So it was quite a thing for me to grow up and see the whole country working to save the country, working together to save the country. I learned a lot about patriotism when I was just a little kid. Other than that, I grew up in a little Italian neighborhood in Queens, New York, called Corona. It was like a little piece of growing up in Italy. Everybody had a little chunk of garden area, farm area in the backyard. It was horse and wagon days. There were a lot of horse and wagon. I mean, there was cars too. This was in the 40s, but there was a lot of people who sold fruit and vegetables or different things like that. They came with horse and wagons, and they screamed and uttered as loud as they could, and you could hear them in the house, and you'd go out and buy their fresh watermelon and things from them like that. So I got to pet a lot of horses and feed a lot of horses. The stable was only about a block and a half away from my house. It was a great experience because my family in those days, the Italian family, stayed very close together. So within a few blocks, my grandmother had 8 children, and all of her children and their children were only a few blocks from her home. So on holidays, it was wonderful. Get together always in Grandma's house. All the kids got together, the cousins, and it was a great way to grow up.
I want to talk about, as you got a little bit older into your youth years, maybe teen years, not exactly sure how old you were, a fishing incident that ended up leading you to join a gang.
To lead up to the fishing incident, I grew up in a house with my mother and 2 older sisters. My father he drove trucks cross country, so I didn't see a lot of him. It was like Christmas whenever he was around. So I was raised by a mother and two older sisters, and I was very coddled, and I was an altar boy, and I went to a Catholic school, so I had nuns on top of me there, making me behave and teaching me how to be guilty if I did anything wrong. And so I was very, very much protected. And then one day, I love to fish, so one day I got my own fishing gear, and I went out to this place in where their old World's Fair was in 1939. Now it was just a great big park. and there was a bridge with the water underneath it, and I used to fish off the bridge. So anyway, I was there by myself fishing off the bridge, and a bunch of guys came walking up the bridge, and one of them ran up to me and said, "Give me your money and all your fishing tackle," and he cursed at me and told me what he was going to do to my head if I didn't do it. And this was something that I'd never experienced anything like that before, and I just froze. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to react. I'd never had anybody attack me. I was always, very much around family and in school with nuns and, protected. And so this was a big jolt for me. And he was about to beat me up and throw me off the bridge. I heard a voice that said, "Hey, that's my cousin. Leave him alone." And my cousin, first cousin, my father's sister's son, came walking out of the group and said, "What are you doing, Ralph?" And I told him, I was shaking and in shock. And I told him I was just fishing. So anyway, I got talking with him, and he said, "We're going to go to a movie. You want to go with us?" And I said, "Yeah." I didn't know. I didn't want to say no. I didn't know what to do. I'm very shaken by the whole thing, and it stayed with me through the rest of the day. But anyway, so now we take this long walk through the park to go to the Loews Plaza on the Roosevelt area in Queens. And we get there, and instead of going to buy a ticket in the lobby, they walk around to the fire escape and climb up the fire escape. That was about 15 guys. And I was one of the youngest. I was about 13. They were all 13, 14, and 15. And heavy weightlifters, and very much more grown up as physically than I was. Anyway, so I don't say anything. I just follow the leader there, and we climb up the fire escape to one of the exit doors, and two of the guys go around the front. I don't know, it was a dime or 20 cents for a ticket. Paid whatever they had to pay for and came in, and then they climbed up. They went up to the upstairs balcony seats, and they opened the exit doors, and we all were rushed in. So this scared the hell out of me, the fact that we were stealing seats and sneaking into a movie. I was petrified that I was going to get arrested, on top of possibly beaten up by the gang. I was going to get arrested now. So they're sitting there watching the movie and put their feet up, and they always pick the center of the balcony, which was the view of. And anybody who was sitting there, they just chased them away and said, "Get out of here! You're in our way." So I'm sitting there waiting for the police to come, and they're enjoying the movie. So the manager comes up with a flashlight and shines it in their faces and says, "If you don't get up and get out of here, I'm going to have you all arrested." And within 2 seconds, they had him upside down, hanging off the edge of the balcony, and they're holding him by his ankles.
What were you thinking?
So I'm in shock. I was in shock when I got there. So this just, this was like a nightmare. This whole thing was like a nightmare to me. Really happening. And he's crying, "Help, but please don't drop me," because it was trying to drop head first, especially from where the balcony was onto the mezzanine. And they said, "Are you going to let us in from now on without bothering us?" Yes, please, yes. So from now on, we go to the candy counter and take what they want. You're going to leave us alone, right? Yes, please don't drop. So they pick them up and put them down and went back and sat down. And any time after that, we would just walk behind the candy counter, help ourselves to what we wanted, go upstairs, chase the people out of the way, and sit down and watch the movie.
So did your mother or father ever know you were hanging around with these guys?
Well, I lived 2 lives for quite a while, but I didn't know. I knew that they wouldn't want this to be happening, even though one of them was my first cousin. I knew that it was wrong. I knew that the stuff that we were doing a lot of fighting and a lot of rough house stuff. And we weren't stealing anything or anything like that, but it was a really rough group. And the thing about the group that fascinated me, I had a great deal of respect. I was taught that all my life for adults. And with them, adults were just somebody they pushed out of the way or made them do what they wanted to have done. And that shot, some of it scared me, but some of it excited me in the fact that they were such decision makers, and I had never made a decision in my life. Not what I was wearing, not where I was going, and what I was eating. I never had to make a decision in my life, and they decided about everything, and they told adults what to do, and that really. So I ended up hanging around with the gang whenever I could, and for my 14th birthday, I got a set of weights because I wanted to try to catch up. And after another year, I was right in the group. I developed quite a bit, and I was just as crazy as the rest of them for a while. In my freshman year at 15 in high school, I knocked the assistant principal down a flight of stairs.
That didn't go well.
I ended up in front of a judge, and they were going to send me away to reform school. And my mother got hysterical and screamed, please, I begged her, I'll do anything, and made a big fuss. And the judge went for it, and he said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to put him in your custody. But he's done a terrible thing, but I'm going to put him in your custody. Actually, what happened, if you have a minute, I can tell you why I hit the guy. We were cutting a class, and we used to go to the art class with a lot of pretty girls in the art class and try to get phone numbers, And we'd tell the teacher to get out of the way, and we'd get phone numbers. And we always like the guy outside of the classroom door, and if somebody was coming, he would yell, and we'd run in the other direction. So that's what happened. So we're running, and I turned this corner. I was first because I was one of the fastest. And I come around the corner, and I run into the assistant principal, who's a big, huge, heavy-set guy. And he grabs me by my collar and slaps me. It was like getting hit with a bolt of lightning. And so I punched him as hard as I could under his chin and knocked him backwards, and he fell down these stairs, and it really got hurt badly. They were those concrete stairs.
Yep, I remember those stairs in school, and I can see why you end up in front of a judge as well.
That's what happened. So he told my mother, if I ever see him again, he goes away until he's 18, and I had barely turned 15 at the time. So they sold our house in Corona and moved me to Hempstead, which was only about 20 miles out onto the island, Long Island. But it was like I was like the original Fonzie, that'll give you an idea. It was going from a juvenile delinquent environment in a really bad high school into a Mickey Rooney movie, That's what it was. The Bobby Soxers and crew haircuts, and the guys wore white bucks and khaki pants. And I had sideburns down all the way to my chin, and I had motorcycle boots and a motorcycle jacket, free ride, a cigarette behind my ear, and and I was so out of place. And the strange thing about it is on my way into the door, my first day in school, I went in the wrong door, and the guy coming out, we bumped into each other, and he said something to me, and I had been indoctrinated in my last few years with the gang. Anybody who disrespected you got punched in the mouth. And so we got in a big fight, and I ended up stuffing him in one of the lockers. and I ended up in front of the principal's office with my mother crying and screaming and begging the principal to give me another chance. Anyway, he did. I did not get arrested, and I got away with that. My mother saved me a couple times.
Yes. So, Ralph, I want to move forward just a little bit. Talk about when you met a lady while you were selling shoes and how that developed into you getting tips in horse racing.
Okay. Well, I always had to work. From when I was about 8 or 9 years old, I always worked at something, a delivery boy or a newspaper or something. So when I was in school, I worked part-time and in the summers they opened up a Lord & Taylor in Garden City, New York, and I used to work there. And then I moved over to Franklin Simon, which is also in Garden City. And I was working in the ladies' shoe department. And there was this little lady that used to come in. She was a Southern lady with a very deep Southern accent, a tiny little thing. And she would always ask me very sadly, sad face, do you have any size 5 AAAs or 5 AAs? And I never had any, and I would always tell them, well, I'll take a look, but there was never anything that small and narrow. And so one day she came in. I said, you know what? Let me have your phone number. I'm going to call the manufacturers. We had like 5 or 6 different manufacturers, and because I figured I know they made small shoes for display, and let me see if I can get something for you. So anyway, I ended up with about 34 pairs of shoes for this woman. And for the next time, I called her up, and she came in. I didn't tell her how many. I said, I think I have a few pairs you might be interested in. So she comes in, and me and one of the stock boys, we stacked all these shoes up in front of her. And she bought half of them. We had to help her load the stuff in her car. She was thrilled to death. So the next day I get a call from her husband. He was, there was a trotter, a racetrack, a horse racetrack, and not very far from the Franklin Simon store. And he owned trotters. And he called me up and he said, we have horses running tonight. Why don't you come and be our guest for dinner? I'd like to show you my appreciation. And I said, well, there's no reason if you do that. I said, but if you get a hot tip, give me a call sometime. And I hung up, I wait for an answer. And that was that. I didn't want anything from this guy. So the next day he called me up and he said, the such and such a race be a good idea to make a bet on the number 3 horse or whatever number it was. And you might get lucky. So I went down there and I bet a few bucks and the horse won. So I said, well, that was nice. And a couple of days later, he calls me again. Same thing. Go down this race and this two. He gave me 2 races. So I went and I bet the first race a couple of bucks and it won. So the second race, I put a chunk of money on it and it won. So then I started wondering, this is kind of interesting. Maybe I can't wait for the next phone call. Right. He did call me a couple more times, and I went down, and I ended up, and I never had a bank account. I was still just in high school. I never had any savings or any amount of money worth saving. We weren't a wealthy family. So my brother-in-law, Pat, opened up a savings account for me, and I put mine. I'm up to $4,000 in there.
Wow.
Off of nickels and dimes when I started. And I had a few $100 left for the next bet. So he calls me up and he tells me how the race was going to be run, like it was choreographed, exactly how to watch the horse, what it was going to do. That was the first time he did that. So, of course, I go down there and I bet it all on the horse's nose. And they're coming around the far turn, just like he told me. When they come around the far turn, the horse is going to the outside and just pass everybody up and go run away with the race. So that's exactly what he's doing. And I'm getting around, I'm standing up, getting ready to go cash my tickets. I had a handful of tickets. And my horse passes the lead horse and the wheels lock, and they both go down on the track. And my horse is screaming out loud like a woman, and they end up shooting my horse on the track. And I just looked at the tickets, threw them away, and I said, if you can't win a boat race, you might as well quit. It's time to quit.
Did you ever find out who the gentleman was?
I knew his name. I never met him. I never did meet him.
So obviously he had some connections to the horse racing in the betting industry.
He owned some horses. He owned some of the horses that raced there. He was one of the owners.
Gotcha. Okay.
So anyway, I don't know. He took a big chance calling me and telling me all this stuff, but he did. I guess his wife got after him because I did her such a big favor. So anyway, I bought a car and I left for California. That's the excuse I needed to get away from. I was getting uncomfortable with what was going on in New York City with the gang. They were graduating into some serious stuff that I didn't want to be involved with, and felt the same way. Some of them did and some didn't. But it was like normal. If you grew up in certain areas in New York, either you worked for the Department of Sanitation or you worked for the mob, one or the other. That's kind of the way it was.
So at 19 years old, you leave New York for L.A.
Yeah.
And you get to L.A. and you find yourself involved with meeting movie stars on set.
Well, I'll tell you, when I got there, one of my sisters was living there, and she was kept inviting me. And I knew a guy from my neighborhood who was an older. I grew up with his younger brother, who was pretty well successful there. His name was Paul Piscerni. He was a movie star. He was doing really well out there. And he was telling his brother and I to go out there, come on out and I'll get you guys started. So I left. His brother wasn't ready to go yet, but I left. I went by him. He wanted to come, and then he decided he wasn't. So I left and went by myself. And he got me a Screen Extras card at Republic Studios. So this, to me, when you grow up in the Northeast, especially in our country, you never see a celebrity unless you go to see a show, a Broadway show or something. But to be around a celebrity or see one on the street, I mean, if you did, you wouldn't realize who it was because you don't expect it. Celebrities are something you see in the movies at that time and television. But now I walk into Republic Studios for the first time, and wherever I looked, I saw somebody I knew or recognized from some TV show that I saw or with a movie star. And this completely wiped me out. I went nuts because I was thrilled about that. And then when I saw what it takes to make they were filming Leave It to Beaver. I'm sure you've heard of that whole show. From Wedding Crane and Restless Gun, and there were M Squad with Lee Marvin. There was quite a few different shows and they all had guest stars on them, Betty Davis, and there was a lot of big stars that would be guest stars, particularly on Wagon Train. So I would be around and I'd see all these people. I get to meet them or talk to them, or sometimes after they got shooting, they'd sit around a fire or something and just, have coffee or drinks and talk for a couple of hours and tell stories. And I loved that. I would just join in and that's their word and just listen. Ward Bond was amazing to me because he was in every great movie they made in the 30s and 40s, You name the movie, was great. He was in it. So to listen to some of the stories he had to tell was fascinating. And I got to meet and get to know a lot of them. Lee Marvin in particular was right up our alley. My friend Pete and he was another guy from my neighborhood who was out there with his family. And so we hang around together. And we got to know Lee Marvin really well, and we would go out during the week. He had a home in Children. I'm not sure if it was Beverly Hills or Bel Air or somewhere like that in the Hollywood area with his family, but they gave him an apartment on the lot because they shot very early in the morning, and it was easier for him to stay there during the week when they were going to be shooting. And so we used that apartment as, that's where we worked from. And we ran all over Hollywood, Lee Marvin and Pete and I. We had a hell of a time during the week, and that was our headquarters. He was such a funny guy. He was a great guy. He was weird. He was strange, but he was a lot of fun. A really fun guy.
And that's just the beginning of the celebrity list that is 2.5 pages long that we're going to continue to get into. But Ralph, we're going to jump to something that I think our listeners are going to love hearing your story about. Is you leave LA in 1958 and you stop in Las Vegas. You're walking into the El Rancho, and walking out are 2 French showgirls. You're not even 21 years old. And tell my listeners the French language that you knew and what that led to.
Well, I was a cocky kid, and I hadn't turned 21. I was a few weeks short, maybe a couple of months short. I don't remember exactly, but of 21. But I'm driving down the strip from LA. I hadn't stopped anywhere yet. I was just entering the city, and I saw this sign. It said French, all nude French review direct from Paris. So that got me, and I pulled in. I'm a kid from New York. I never heard of anything like that, let alone witnessed it. So I said, I got to check this out. So I'm walking in. I go in through the first 2 doors, and I'm walking in kind of like a hallway. And these 2 girls, heavily made up, beautiful-looking girls, are walking towards me, and they're chattering in French. And the only word the words I knew in French were bonjour, which means hello, I think, or good afternoon or something. And so that's what I said. Well, the look on their face, their eyes almost popped out, and they attacked me because they thought that I could speak French, and I guess I was the only guy in Las Vegas at the time that they thought could speak French. It was all cowboys and guys from the South in those days, and no French people that I can remember. So anyway, they attacked me. They're climbing all over me and talking, chattering in French and feeling my muscles, and I was in really good shape at the time. I know they were all excited, and finally when they realized, when I was looking at them like a dummy and I didn't know what the hell they were talking about, it didn't really make any difference anymore. And they dragged me out, and we went to my car, and they weren't impressed by a new Cadillac convertible. That didn't impress them at all. I thought it would, but it didn't. And they told me how to get to where they wanted to go to get something to eat, but this was between shows before they had to go back for the second show. So they're giving me last minute instructions, and I couldn't understand what they were saying. So I'm making screeching turns and halts, and I got arrested. But we were hysterical in the car because of all that. I had a lot of fun with them. They were wonderful girls. They're terrific. Anyway, so we get back to the hotel, and they take me backstage, and they talk to the stage manager, who was French, and they talked him into letting me stay backstage right by the stage entrance in the back, where the girls, where everybody went in and out, so I could watch the show from there.
Did you think you were in a dream right now?
Well, not yet, but I'll tell you, they put this chair there, and they sat me down, and they made motions and made me understand not to move, to stay there, and I wasn't going to move anyway. I wanted to see what was going to happen. I had no idea what to expect, though. So after a few minutes, the lights go down, and the loudspeaker comes on, and the music and everything starts, and all of a sudden it seemed like 2,000 almost nude, gorgeous creatures came running past me with perfume and feathers right in my nose, as they were running in and out, jiggling all over the place. And I went, I was in shock again, I said to myself, I really did. Who do I have to kill to get a job here? This is heaven. All these beautiful girls, young girls, running around like this. It's weird about that, They're practically nude on the stage. They're all 18 and 19. The two that I knew, one was 18, one was 19, and I was barely 21. And they were allowed to do that, walk around topless. And they weren't allowed in the casino because they were too young.
Wow.
But that's how I met the girls, and we went afterwards. We went to a party, a show party. So I met a lot of the others, and I ended up going to their apartment with them, and I ended up moving in with them, and we in love with each other. Really, the three of us. It sounds strange, but it wasn't at all. I was nuts for both of them. It wasn't the. It was really a very affectionate thing. We really got a big kick out of each other. It was really a lot of fun. Something I'm glad I didn't miss.
The book is The Last Casino. I'm going to put a link to the show notes, and there's more to this story and more that we're going to continue to talk about. So I can't stress enough, you need to read the book to get the entire story. Ralph, I want to, again, jump forward a little bit. You end up at the Sahara, and you're there for 5 years, and you meet the king of rock and roll.
I'll explain how that worked. Elvis and his manager, Colonel Parker. Colonel Parker was a very close friend of Milton Prell, who was the president of the Sahara. So that's why whenever they came to town, Parker went to the Sahara, and of course Elvis went with them. And so they never stayed anywhere else except at the Sahara. That was their home in Las Vegas because of Prell. So I went to work there in 1960 as a dealer. I broke in downtown, and the dealers, when they got a break, weren't allowed to hang around in the casino. They had a room downstairs. They call it the dealer's room. They had waitresses down there, and they served us food and drinks free and everything. We could watch television or play cards or do whatever we wanted on our breaks and after work, too. So that's where the dealers would go. And many times when Elvis was in town, rather than hang around with all the swells and the big shots upstairs, he preferred to be with us downstairs in the dealer's room. and we talk about, Vegas and different stuff. He played cards with us, hang around with us. And he was just one of the guys. And that's what he liked. That was his style. He didn't walk around and look down his nose at anybody. He was a regular guy, and he felt uncomfortable, really, honestly, around the big shots at that time. Anyway, he'd rather be with us. I'll put it to you that way. And so I got to know him really well. And after not very long, whenever he got checked in, he would always come looking for me. And we'd get together and catch up and we'd talk. And we had a lot of fun together. He was the most unselfish, one of the most unselfish persons I've ever known.
Did you get to attend his wedding?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. But he had a thing that anybody who he really cared about, if they admired anything that he owned, no matter what it was, he would not rest until they took it. Rings, clothes, cars. It didn't make any difference. If I said to him, "I really like that ring," I would have to take it home that day, and there's no two ways about it. He would insist. He went to a Cadillac place once. He had like 6 or 7 Cadillacs at the time, and he used to look for the big Fleetwoods. This was before they had these limos, and the big Cadillac Fleetwood was the biggest American-made car. And so he was looking at one of those, and there was a black lady who was doing some cleanup, and she said, "Mr. Elvis, you look really good in that car. That's the car for you." And she drove it home. He bought and paid for it and gave it to her, and she took it home. That's a true story. And he'd done that with other people too. But he gave it to her, and she drove it home. That's the way he was, to a fault. I mean, when I say to a fault, a lot of his friends and associates took full advantage of that, and it just irked the hell out of me after I got to know him and we became friends. Mm-hmm. It bothered me a lot, but I was reluctant to ever get involved and say anything about it.
So, Ralph, how did you introduce Elvis to Chuck Norris?
Well, I met this a Japanese guy who taught Aikido, which is a martial art. It's similar, has some similarity to karate, but its main function is use the strength of your opponent against him. And the bigger and stronger he is, the more of an advantage that is for you, because you learn how to use all of it against him. And it was a very interesting martial art. But this was in the 60s, in the middle 60s, and karate wasn't very well known in this country yet. It wasn't a big thing. There weren't karate schools or any of that stuff at the time. And so all of a sudden, I got interested in this thing, and then he had to go back to Japan for some reason. I didn't quite understand what the problem was. And within a few days after he left, there was an advertisement in the paper that there was a karate tournament going to be held at the convention center in Las Vegas, the first one ever there. And all these people were going to appear there. They had Chuck Norris and all these other names, none of whom I'd ever heard of before. So I went to it, and I was impressed with Chuck. He was a karate fighter, and he put on a couple of demonstrations, and he got my attention more than some of the other experts that were there. And the very next day while I was working, I see him come walking into the casino. So I went up to him and I handed him my card, and I said, "Listen, is there any schools in town where I can continue? I'd like to continue on." I explained what had happened with the Japanese guy, and he said, "Well, I have a black belt here. He has a school in his backyard, and I come in once a week to teach the class." He said, "You're welcome to join that." So I did. So that's how I got to know him. At that time, this was around the middle 60s, 66, 65, 66, early 67 maybe. It was early middle 60s. And that's how he made his living. He had 4 or 5 schools in the Los Angeles area, and he had this one school in Las Vegas, and that's how he made his living. When he wasn't fighting in tournaments, I guess he got paid for that. When he entered in a lot of these tournaments, he fought as a lightweight. I guess he made money doing that. But when there weren't tournaments, it was a school he depended on. He had a family. He had a wife and 2 young boys at the time, as I recall. So he kept asking me, introduce me to Elvis. I'd love to meet Elvis because he heard that I knew Elvis. And I said, sure, Elvis is a karate nut. I'm sure he'd like to meet you too. So, when you're in town, and I'll get you together. So as it happened, I did finally introduce the two of them, and they became very close. And Elvis, when he was in Los Angeles making movies, and Chuck lived there, so they were seeing a lot of each other. And I guess he took him or introduced him to Steve McQueen. And I believe through Steve McQueen, Chuck met some movie people, and that's how he got started in the movies.
So you're responsible for Chuck Norris's movie career.
In his first book, in his first autobiography, he put a paragraph in there, and it's in the paragraph that said, I owe my movie career to a Las Vegas pit boss, meaning me. And he didn't put my name, but he said Las Vegas pit.
Speaking of being a pit boss, Ralph, you spent 10 years at the Dunes. When you were involved at the Dunes, we're not going to go through the whole story. We're just going to kind of hit on some points here. Did you know that casino was mobbed up when you got involved in it, first off?
Well, all of the casinos that I worked in, from when I first got in town in the 58 through the 70s, were mob-run casinos.
Okay.
They were all connected somehow or another, whether they admitted it or not, but they were all mob-run casinos downtown and on the Strip. Sure. They were all associated one way or another. So of course I knew that they were, but this was especially the big boss. His name was Sid Wyman. I have a copy of a telegram that was sent to Sid Wyman at the Flamingo. He was the casino manager of the original Flamingo that Bugsy Siegel built, and he worked there when it opened. And there's a copy of a telegram from Meyer Lansky to Sid Wyman telling him that Ben Siegel was killed last night. Close all the credit. Don't give away any more credit. Don't talk to the press until I get there tomorrow. You're giving him instructions as to what to do the day after Ben Siegel was killed. And Sid Wyman was running the place for Bugsy Siegel. And now when I go to work at the Dunes, he's running the Dunes.
And you have that telegram?
I have a copy of it, yeah.
That's unreal. So, Ralph, then when did you, I don't know if you've ever witnessed it firsthand or realized or whatever, but when did you understand that there was skim happening?
Oh, well, it was known throughout Vegas. From the first day I went to work downtown Las Vegas in 58, the word was there was always talk about how the skim was going on the Strip in particular, and downtown too, because the mob was backing all these places. They built them, and that's why they built them. They built them to get the cash,
right?
Tax-free cash for all of their legal and illegal businesses that they were running from the big cities that they came from. That was just an easy way of picking up tax-free cash. And that's why they built the casinos. They had no idea that they were going to turn out to be as huge as they did, but you have to give them credit for knowing how to operate them. And that's what made Las Vegas. The way they knew how to run a casino is what made Vegas so popular. Corporations, they took over from there, but changed everything. And that's the reason the book is called The Last Casino. I've had some people criticize the name of the book. They said you could have given it a better name because it really doesn't fit, but it does. There's a story in the title of the book, The Last Casino. It's about the last mob-run casino, one of the last. And to me, those were casinos. Now they're factories. When the mob took over, they became factories, not casinos.
Yeah, and I want to encourage, again, the listeners to get your hands on the book. The story is fascinating once you get into it about this casino and what Ralph had gone through and witnessed and seen. And like I said, we're just going to kind of hit on a couple things. And the two more points I want to talk about on this, and then we're going to move to something else, Ralph, is will you just kind of briefly discuss your first day on the job in the baccarat room?
You have to be a Las Vegan who worked in the casino industry in those days to know how important a baccarat job on the strip was. People that were casino managers would have dropped that job in a minute to get a job in the Caesars or Dunes baccarat pit, or the Sands. They had a good baccarat pit too. But the Caesars and the Dunes were probably the biggest. See, the thing about working in baccarat, you didn't have to deal it to make a lot of money. If you were a pit boss or a pit supervisor, you were in on the tips. You got an envelope, a full envelope, just like the dealers did. That's the only pit where they did that. You didn't get it if you were in the blackjack pit or if you were in the dice pit. You weren't allowed to take 10 tips from anybody.
Mm-hmm.
But in the baccarat, you got a full cut. And the tips in the baccarat pit, because it was such a high limit game, were huge. And everybody in town wanted that job. So when I got it, I just mentioned to the boss that hired me that I knew a little about baccarat, because they had a baccarat pit at the Aladdin when I was there. I was there 5 years, and they had opened one, so I learned about it. So I told him, if you ever need somebody, I know about the game, and he put me in there and hired me over a big, huge list. And I didn't want to try to figure out why he picked me. I was just flattered that he did, but then I figured out later why he put me in there,
Mm-hmm.
And I put me for the Lions, really.
Yeah, it did. And as the story progresses, and I'm going to use this as a cliffhanger because I want my listeners to get a hold of the book and read the story for you. There are some developments that happen. You end up having to let go one of the dealers. Things start to go south. Things are not going your way. And you come out one day and you realize you have a flat tire. But then when you open the trunk, what did you find?
Well, what happened is I walked out after having some conflict with some of the people that were involved with helping the owners skim off of the baccarat pit. They went to the baccarat pit to skim cash because the government stopped them from skimming in the counting room. So the only place they get their hands on cash was in the baccarat pit.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of that going on. And I didn't know that until I walked into it. So I kind of, questioned it, and they objected to that because I was getting in the way of all the extra money they were making. So anyway, I wasn't going to get scared off because the money was really good. And I had 2 kids at home, 3 kids actually. So I walk out to the car and I see my car had a flat tire. So I walked and I took a look, and it was very obviously slashed with a really sharp instrument, a knife or something. It wasn't just a nail. It was a slashed tire. So I called security. I went up to the valet desk and I called security. And this security guard named Jimmy, who I knew, came out. And I showed him, and I said, "You make a report about this, that my car's been slashed." And, and he said, "Okay." He said, "Come on, I'll help you change the tires." So I went and I opened the trunk. And as I went to reach into the trunk, I didn't hear anything, but I saw some movement, and I looked. And just as I was reaching in, I saw a sidewinder rattlesnake just coiling up, ready to take a shot at me. No noise, no rattle, nothing like that. Just coiling up, getting ready for me another inch or two, and I would have been on the end of my hand. So I pulled back, and Jim almost fainted. When I think about how shook he was about that. Of course, we slammed the trunk shut, and he ran in and called the police, and they came out, and they said, "We can't move the car. There might be a bomb in here, too, if they're out to get you this bad." So we had to wait for their bomb squad and all of that. And, so that was the beginning of quite an adventure.
We don't want to give away the end, so we want him to go to the book. That's just, like you said, the tip of the iceberg that ends up happening. culminates at the very end, and it's a great story. Happy that you're here to talk about it and tell some of it. But I want to jump one more point forward before we end the podcast here is we're going to go to 1980-82. You're in Atlantic City. Ralph, how'd you bring championship boxing back to Atlantic City?
Well, my father was a big fight fan. He used to take me to fights all the time. And when I was a kid, they had a lot of fights in New York, little areas where they had a boxing ring behind a restaurant and stuff like that. He loved all of that, and he would take me to all the fights. Took me to Ebbets Field once to see a local heavyweight who fought Tammy Mariello and got knocked out. He took me to all the fights, so I was a big fight fan. And I knew that Atlantic City in the old days was a big mecca for championship fights.
Yeah.
But it had become a slum, really. And there was no interest there anymore. And then all of a sudden they got the casinos, and they were opening up the casinos. And nobody thought about bringing the fights in, but the casinos were drawing big action because they were the only ones on the East at the time. So that came to my mind. So I called Bob Arum, and I told him, look, we can't afford. This was Playboy. I was a vice president of casino marketing at Playboy in Atlantic City. I opened the casino. And that's one of the things I wanted to do. I wanted to start right away with championship boxing. So I said, I want championship fights, but I don't want the big monster ones. Well, we can't afford that. I'll sign a contract for a certain amount of fights. They have to be nationally televised, CBS, which was one he was working with. And that's what happened. We made a deal. I put the fights on at Playboy, and they came in, and it was fantastic. And the championship fights came back to Atlantic City, and I was really proud of that. Nobody ever gave me credit for it, but I didn't care about that.
I'm giving you credit now. I remember watching some of them fights on TV with my father, from Atlantic City. I always remember Atlantic City, Philadelphia being Meccas before it came to Vegas.
Yeah. Atlantic City, sure. And so anyway, that's what brought them back. That's how they came back. And then Caesar started doing it, and they were holding their fights at the Atlantic City Convention Center. But the others picked up on it because it was one of the top draws. There was only one thing better I could do at Playboy than championship fights that would draw the better players, the top customers. And that was the idea of special events, to get your big players to come. I got the idea of having 10 centerfolds come in and do a party for the VIP clients, and have a dinner party where you could dance with them and take pictures with them and get autographs with them, and have dinner with them.
That had to be successful.
Well, this was in like the early 1980, 81, and Playboy was huge at that time. So when I talked to Hugh Hefner about it, he said, well, it sounds like a good idea. He said, but I don't like sending the girls out there unless somebody watches over them. So I said, well, we've got a great security group there. He said, no. He said, I want you to take personal responsibility taking care of those girls. I said, well, I'll do the best I can, but I'm under huge responsibility of all these things, these events, and all this other stuff that I'm doing. I can't just follow them around. He said, no, I just want you to make sure that they're in bed when they're supposed to be, and they're, So I said, okay, I'll do the best I can. But anyway, it was the biggest draw. The men came, and they brought their wives, but they came, all the big players. Whenever I threw one, they all came to get their picture taken with a centerfold, recent centerfold. Yeah. But they were wild. I mean, the minute they got there, they were in hello, they disappeared, they partied. They were just party girls, and they had a hell of a time, and I couldn't keep track of them. He would call me up and say, I'm trying to reach this one. I can't read. Where is she? I said, I don't know. He said, we'll find out. You're supposed to know where they are. One of them was packed up with one of the owners that owned a basketball team in Philadelphia for a while. I mean, they were all over the place. I couldn't keep track of them. But anyway.
Listeners, visit my website, beforethelightspod.com, and click on the vegas.com banners that you'll find at the bottom of the website. When you click on those banners, you're going to get the best deals in Las Vegas for shows, hotels, and vacation packages.
go to beforethelightspod.com and click on the vegas.com banners. Ralph, I want to say thank you for taking time and telling some stories. And I know you have a ton more that we could get to, but thanks for sharing what you did for me today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's always good to talk to you.
For show notes, go to my website, beforethelightspod.com. Click on the episode page to get all information and links, not to this episode, but others as well. Follow me on Instagram at Before the Lights Podcast. If you would, please subscribe to the show on any platform that podcasts are found, such as Apple, Stitcher, and Spotify. Thank you for listening to Before the Lights. I'm Tommy Canale. And until next time, everybody, a salute, a chin chin.